Hello. Welcome back to another video. Let's solve tactics. So let's see where we left off last time. So I had reached a 1503 rating and let's get started. Okay, so it is black to move. White has just moved their bishop from e3 to d2, attacking our queen. Okay, so the first thing I notice is my rook is attacking their rook and the rook is defended by the queen. Also, the other rook on d8 is attacking the bishop, which is attacked twice by my queen and rook, and defended twice. So it feels like this queen may end up being overloaded, meaning it has too many things to do. It has to hold on to this bishop on d2, as well as this rook on b1. I feel that may be something, the key to the tactic, but let's see how we finesse that. Okay, in terms of candidates, I mean, my queen being attacked is somewhat significant. So rook takes d2 could be one candidate, but that immediately fails. Rook takes d2 will fail to rook takes b8 check. I lose my rook with a check. And once I move my king up, he takes my rook on d2 with, let's say, his queen. And that's not going to end up good for me. Okay, so rook takes d2 is out. So rook takes b1. What about rook takes b1? Now I am hanging my queen. So there, I think he has choices. If he takes my rook on b1 with his queen, then I can take on d2, and white can always throw in a check on b8, either after taking my bishop first or right away. And I'll be able to, I think, come back to g7. So I don't think there is any danger there. So rook takes b1. Now what about if he takes my queen? Rook takes b1, bishop takes c3. Now I have rook takes e1 check, taking his queen back. He takes back with his bishop. And in that position, I will have rook to d1, pinning the bishop on e1 to his king. And notice that the rook is not able to defend easily. It cannot go to e2 thanks to my bishop on a6 guarding the e2 square. Also, it cannot go to f1. I mean, it can. It probably should. It goes to f1. I take the rook. He takes back. And I should be doing okay there. So let's review that line. So I'm planning rook takes b1. If he takes my queen, I will take his queen with check. He takes back. I go rook d1. He goes rook f1 to protect his bishop that is pinned. I take the rook, he takes back, and I'm doing well there. I believe I have a rook against his bishop, right? Or no? Rook b1, bishop c3, rook e1, take. Yeah, I have a rook against his bishop, should be winning. So let's see, any other ideas? As I pointed out, rook takes d2 will not work thanks to rook takes b8. So queen takes d2 could be considered. Queen takes d2, if he just takes my queen with his rook, what have I got? I can, take back on d2, but then again I'm hanging my rook. And if I take on b1 after queen d2, rook d2, then I'm hanging the other rook. So queen d2 definitely does not work. Rook b1 seems like the answer. Any other moves with the queen other than capturing on d2 that could be interesting? I don't think so. So rook b1, if queen b1, we are playing rook d2, winning the bishop using the overloaded queen. So let's go with that. Okay. Yeah, here I plan to take. Hopefully that is correct. Okay, and he takes. Okay, we got 5 points. Let's keep going. Okay, go ahead if you would like to pause your video. It is black to play. White has just moved their knight from f3 to h4. Okay, so I notice, of course, that white is offering his knight, but I think maybe his idea was that he will capture my knight on h5. But if I take his knight, my queen also guards the knight. Let's see what's the material balance. The material balance seems even. Yeah, I think exactly even. Uh, Other than taking his knight on h4, any other forcing moves? Really, this bishop takes d4 doesn't lead to anything, and most of my pieces are sitting on the back rank, so I don't expect there'll be anything else. Quickly checking. So queen h4, queen takes h4, that is. He may try to distract my queen from the knight by going g3. I retain control of my knight by going to h3, and I think white should have run out of tricks there. So let's take, and now I was planning just to go to h3 so I can keep my knight on h5 defended. Oh, okay. Well, I didn't anticipate this move. Okay, so then now he's attacking my knight a second time. I could protect it. I could move it back to f6. I could do something else. I don't think knight takes g3 leads to anything. Knight g3, hg3 or fg3. I don't have enough pieces to muster up an attack. So knight to f6. I don't think I'm in danger of getting my queen trapped because knight g4, sorry, bishop g4 is not allowed. I mean, it's not possible because my knight controls the g4 square. So if I did protect the knight with a pawn move like g6, then I would run into bishop g4 and my queen would end up being trapped. So knight f6 has to be correct. Okay, 10 points. I think knight f6 maybe the reason why I got 10 points. Okay, fine. Let's keep going. Okay, go ahead. If you would like to pause your video, it is white to play. Black has just captured something on d4. I forgot what it is. Okay, so my eye is drawn to the lineup of my queen and rook on the e6 pawn. I can take that in one of two ways, with the rook or queen. Taking with the queen looks very interesting. Possibly there may be a mate here. So queen takes e6 check. Now king has to go to either d8 or f8. If he goes to f8, then we can quickly play queen to e8 or queen to e7. Both are checkmate. So if he goes to d8, which seems like the only try, even then I have queen to e8, which is checkmate. So this leads to mate. And that is checkmate. Or no, oh my god, I just blundered that the rook can take my queen. Oh, that was so bad. That was so bad. Okay, let's reattempt this. Okay, so I should take the rook, I guess. Take the rook. And next move, I will be able to checkmate him this way. Yeah. Okay, well, we got one wrong. So yeah, learn from me and do not rush. Let's keep going. Okay, so white to play. Black has just moved their bishop from c3 to d4. Okay, so again, I'm looking at, of course, this lineup of our rooks, the battery of rooks doubled up on the g file against this knight. Also, I have a bishop on d3 that is attacking. So this knight is attacked 3 times, protected only twice by the 2 black rooks. And also, there may be some kind of opportunities related to the black king because it is, kind of stuck in the corner here. But at the same time, the bishop did attack my rook. Now, in terms of material balance, I see that I have an extra piece. I have a knight hanging out here on c7. So, no, I'm sorry. I do not have an extra piece. The material is actually exactly equal. Yeah, okay. Fine. So then the attack of the bishop on my rook is significant, but at the same time, I don't think a defensive move would be the answer to the tactic. It might be, but let's look at the aggressive options first. So rook takes knight, or bishop takes knight, or knight takes d5. Uh, those 3 captures definitely look like important candidates. Other candidates, I don't think I can set up a mate threat. Even if I play something like rook to g5, I'm not really threatening any mates, am I? rook to h5 will, his king can run to g7, and I don't think I'm checkmating him. So okay, so something, one of those captures I feel. So let's look at rook takes g6, rook takes knight. So rook takes g6. Now he can either take my rook on g1 with the bishop, or he can take on g6. Taking on g1 seems understandable. Uh, so, but then I can take his rook on f6 if he takes. So I'm looking at rook takes g6, bishop takes g1, uh, rook takes f6, which suddenly is left undefended thanks to his bishop moving. So let's remove the arrows. Okay. So rook takes g6, rook takes bishop g1, rook f6. So I end up with a extra knight there. I don't think he's checkmating me, because if it was rook on g1, it'll be checkmate, but since it's a bishop. Okay. So now after rook takes g6, he can also take my rook on g6 with either rook. So let's say he takes with the f rook. Now I can take back with the rook on the first rank, and I have basically again won a knight, because this knight, as I mentioned, is attacked 3 times and defended only twice. So it is in fact hanging to some extent. Okay, so rook takes g6, rook takes f6. Either rook doesn't matter. It's not working. Any other moves he can try? Other than bishop takes g1, bishop takes rook, I don't really see what else. Also, after bishop takes rook, would I have... Yeah, no. Yeah, I think I feel pretty good about that. Any merit to knight takes d5 right away? Knight takes d5. I mean, he could just... I don't know. He could just move his rook, attack my knight, and suddenly I have 2 things hanging, my rook on g1 and my knight. And I don't know if I've improved my situation. So I am going to play this. Okay. And now take with the rook. I think that is important. And finally, take with the bishop. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, go ahead if you would like to pause. It is black to play, and white had just moved their knight out to f3. Okay. So a position where most of my pieces are not very advanced and not really attacking black's position. The queen is covered by this knight, so, and I don't see anything active my queen can do on the b file by going to b7 or b8. The knight and rook here are, really not effective. This knight on c6 is really the one piece. Also, maybe the bishop on f6. These are the 2 pieces that could do something. So yeah, I do notice a possibility as soon as I say that. Maybe I can try knight to b4, uh, threatening some kind of a fork on d3, or possibly someday some fork on c2. And also that opens up an attack of the queen on the knight on f3. So let's see how he would respond to that. If white just goes ahead and castles after knight to b4, knight b4, castle. Not sure what I would do there. I actually could play knight c2 there, knight to c2, attacking the trapped rook in the corner. And if the queen takes my knight on c2, I could take the knight on f3, which is in effect a trade. But in that position, I am threatening bishop c6 with some nasty mating ideas on the long diagonal. So, but that's a very long-winded idea. Not sure if that is the solution. Let's look at different candidates. Knight to b4 is one. Knight to a5, going after this pawn, really doesn't seem like the right thing to do. Especially because he could easily defend again with something like b3 or d3, and my knight is, it's not clear what I'm doing there. So, and knight to e5, he just takes. Oh, he doesn't take. Okay, that's actually interesting. Knight to e5, because there is a pin right here, so my queen is looking at his rook. I think that may be the key to the tactic. So knight to e5. Now I'm attacking this knight on f3 twice, and if he captures my knight on e5, we take h1 with check. Then once the king moves to e2, I can take his queen with check, and finally I can recover my knight, and I would have won a whole rook in that sequence. So he cannot capture my knight on e5 after knight e5, but I'm attacking it a second time and moving the knight anywhere to g1, d4, g5, h4 at a minimum loses the rook. So, and I'm not certain, I'm not seeing how he can add another protector on the knight. The rook cannot defend, the other knight is not able to come to d2. The king coming to e2 does not help because it blocks the queen. So knight to e5 should be it. What else can white do after knight to e5? Any ways to muddy the waters? I don't really see anything. White is also very underdeveloped. All these pieces are sitting, all the queenside pieces are sitting on their original squares. So knight to e5 looks like it wins at least a piece, if not more. Okay, I take the rook. Now I think I solve the problem of my hanging queen by taking the queen first and then recollect my knight. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, go ahead if you would like to pause your video. And this is white to play. Black has just moved their bishop out to d6. Okay, interesting position. My knight out here on c7 is hanging, and it's deep in the enemy territory. I'm sure white just captured something on c7. Now, um, let's look at the material balance. So I see black has an extra bishop, and in terms of pawns, I think we are equal. Yeah. Okay. So white is down a piece right now, right? I have a knight and bishop, and black has a knight and two bishops. Okay. So it is somewhat of desperate times. I need to do something, otherwise I just end up losing. I do notice that this knight can actually come to b5 and fork the queen and the bishop on d6. Okay. That may be the key to the tactic. If I take his bishop on d6, then he takes back with the queen, and I don't think I'm winning material. I may be able to recover my knight. It can come back through b5 to d4, but I'm not winning a piece back. And as I mentioned, I need to win something because I'm down a piece right now. So knight b5 looking interesting. What would he try there? His queen is hanging, so taking my bishop on f4, I'll take his queen. That doesn't solve anything. He will have bishop e3 at the end, pinning my rook, so he wins an exchange on top of winning my bishop. So, but that is still not enough material for the queen. Other than that, what else can he do after knight b5? Moving the queen anywhere, even to c5. I just take, let's say, with check, knight takes d6 check, and that should be good because yeah, that should be good. Any other moves? Bishop c1, trying to trap the queen somehow, is an attempt, but he could possibly go to a5, maybe even c5, but at least a5, and I don't think I have a good way to attack him again. And my knight is not coming out anymore. It can come out through d5, but it'll be captured. So knight b5 looks like the move. Okay, and he gives up his queen, and we get 5 points. Okay, let's keep going. It is black to play. White has just moved their queen to e3. Okay, a queen endgame. I noticed that we have this outside passed pawn, which is extremely important in endgames because outside pass pawns can often be the winning asset in endgames. So I also noticed that this queen to e3 move allowed me to trade queens by force if I want to, while playing queen to f4 check. So that is a check that also attacks his queen. So either he can take my queen, or after the king moves, I'll be allowed to take. So let's click away and remove the arrow. Okay. Now also I see that my pawn is outside the square. I mean, the king is outside the square of my pawn. So this king, if we came down to just a pawn in game after trade of queens, this king on h2 will not be able to catch my pawn on a5. Now another thing to notice will be the square of this pawn, because I'm looking at queen f4, he can take my queen and I have to take with my g pawn, in which case this g4 pawn of white's becomes a passed pawn running down this way. But I am very much within the square of this pawn, which I will draw. So I should be able to catch it. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and trade into the pawn endgame. And let's go. And we win. If he had played g5, I'm still within the square and I would have pushed a4. If he went g6, I could have played king e7, g7, king f7. And you see I'm catching the pawn, but white is unable to catch my own pawn. Okay. And the square technique that I used, if you're not familiar, that's a nice nifty shortcut for pawn endgames, and you can use it just the way I did right here. Okay. Okay, talking about pawn endgames, we get one. It is black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. White has just moved their king up to f5. So let's see if the square will help us. So you of course don't have to draw the diagonal. So if I was to do it cleaner, I would just do this. So this is the square. So I will take a second to describe this technique of the square. So if if it's a race between a pawn marching towards the promotion square and a king trying to stop the pawn, then if the king that is trying to defend is able to step on the square, so let's say if if it was white's move and white could step on the e5 square, which is on the square, white would be able to catch the pawn. Okay. Now in this case, if I played a4, I will create a smaller square, and a smaller square like this once the pawn is on a4, which you can tell white is not able to get into. So pushing a4 definitely is a candidate, but we also have to consider what happens on the other side, because white also has a passed pawn of his own. So a4, white trying to stop my pawn is hopeless, as we discussed, thanks to the rule of the square. So he has to try and promote his pawn. So after a4, he can try pushing the pawn, in which case king e7 will not only catch the pawn, but also capture the pawn. And I am winning there. So king e6 has to be tried. So king e6, now if I go a3, so a4, king e6, a3, he could play d7, and suddenly I'm not able to catch the pawn. Or am I? Yeah, I'm not able to. So I will be losing there. So after king e6, I have to take a moment and play king e8, in which case if he pushes the pawn now, I can block it on d8 and my pawn still promotes on the other side of the board. So I do think starting with a4 is important, because otherwise, as I pointed out, white will be able to step inside the square of my pawn. So we push our pawn first, and in this case white is just going after our pawn, so we don't worry. And now he pushes his, we come closer, we take the queen, push, and next move we'll promote. Okay, let's keep going. It is white to play. Go ahead and pause if you would like to. And black has just moved their king out of check and moved it to f8. Okay, so clearly the tactic, the main thing I'm drawn to is the king position, black's king position, that is. It's cut off, it has no squares, and I have a queen that's able to jump in and deliver a check, or possibly come to h5 to threaten mate. So those are the ideas I'm working with. Other than that, quickly looking at my rest of my pieces, the rooks can't do anything. The bishop could join in an attack on h6, but I don't think that's how we begin. So queen f3 check has to be examined, but black is able to play knight f6, and that really spoils my plans because it now attacks the bishop on d5, blocks the path of my queen, stops my queen from going further to h5, and brings his bishop possibly into the game, the bishop on c8, that is. So queen f3 definitely not correct. Queen h5 on the other hand looks very interesting because threatens mate. The As far as I can tell, moving any piece, meaning not a pawn, will not prevent mate. So knight moves or queen moves or any moves cannot help. Only move that can help is pawn to g6. So queen h5, he has to block my mate threat. And now I could, oh yes, I just noticed something. Now I could actually, let me see. We don't want to make another mistake, right? We already got one wrong in this session. So I think I could checkmate him by going bishop to h6. Is that mate? Yes, even queen to h6 for that matter will be mate. Yeah. So queen to h5 definitely correct. And he allows the checkmate, so we take it. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, white to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. Black just moved their rook from d3 to d7. Okay, again I'm looking at all this concentration of forces around the black king. So seeing if there is any checkmating opportunities. In terms of material, white has an extra rook, but we have two pieces for the rook, and white also has one extra pawn. So yeah, so we have two pieces for white's rook and pawn. Yeah, which is roughly equal material balance. Okay. But the main thing I would say is just the fact that our pieces are super active and concentrated on black's king. So rook g6 come to mind. So rook g6 check. Now, if he goes to h8, not sure what I do there. Bishop f6 check could be considered. He will be forced to come up to g7. And what do I do there? Not sure. Okay, let's think. What are the candidate moves here? I'm not going to start looking at one move. Instead, let's draw up a list of candidates. I think that's a good technique that could be used in this position. Okay, so knight f5 check, is a candidate. Rook g6 check, definitely a candidate. With the bishop, some slow moves like bishop f4 to e5, those seem too slow. Moving the other bishop on f7 means we are trading rooks, so that cannot be correct. So I'm going to start with knight f5 and rook g6. Knight g8 could also be some kind of a candidate, trying to enable bishop h6 maybe. But okay, maybe those three. Knight f5 check, rook g6 check, uh, knight g8. Okay, so let's look at knight f5 check first. Knight f5 check. Now he can go to either h7 or h8. Now let's look at him going to h7. If he goes to h7, I have rook to h6, and that'll be checkmate. So if he goes to h8 after knight f5, knight f5 check, king h8, again I have rook to h6. Right? Yep. And that is also checkmate. Yeah. Okay. So knight f5 looks correct. Okay. And this is mate. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, go ahead if you would like to pause. It is white to play. Black has just moved their queen out to f6. Okay, so I notice first thing is the forking distance between the knight, sorry, the queen and the rook. I mean, the knight could jump to d7 and fork the queen and the rook. Now, in terms of material, looks roughly equal, the material. Okay. Now, black on their previous move is threatening to take on f2 with the queen possibly. I do notice a simplification tactic, which might be the answer. So queen takes f8 check, taking the rook with check, dragging the king out to f8, and then delivering the fork. Knight d7 check. Now the king can go to, let's say, e7. We take their queen. He takes us either with the knight or pawn or king. In either case, I have managed to exchange my knight for his rook with a good endgame. I think that is the answer. I don't think there is anything else in this position. So let's go for it. Check, take, and we will win. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause. White has just moved their queen from h4 to c4. I think this one is similar to the last one. I noticed that I can drag their king out to f3 by taking this knight. After king captures, I have knight e5, forking the king on f3 and the queen on c4, after which I will take their queen on c4. And in this whole sequence, I would have won a whole knight. Now, at the end of it all, white could try attacking my knight with rook c1 or pawn to b3. But rook c1, I cap. I'm not worried about any of those because uh, my knight has ample places to go. So I think that is good. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, go ahead if you would like to pause your video. It is black to play. White has just moved their queen to h6. Okay, so first thing I notice, we are faced with a threat of mate. Never a pleasant feeling. Okay. Second thing, of course, there is a lineup of, our rook and his rook on the back rank. So there could be some tactics associated with that. His king does look a little exposed. So yeah, I do feel, I mean, moving the king is not possible. So I don't think there are defensive moves that help us. Maybe, I'm not going to calculate much, but maybe pushing the f pawn could be the only chance to get out of this mate. But so we have to do something aggressive first. I don't think we can just defend. Okay. So rook takes f1 check is a candidate. Queen to h1 checks, giving up my queen could be a candidate, but I think we can quickly eliminate that one. So queen to h1 check, king takes queen, rook takes rook check, king to g2, and I'm coming up short because I don't have any good checks anymore, and he still has the mate threat, so that didn't work. Now rook takes rook check, rook takes f1, that is. He must take, that is forcing. And then I have either rook to d1 check or I have queen to h1 check. Now let's look at queen to h1, looks more interesting. Queen to h1 forces king to e2. Now in that position I will have queen to d1 check, and which forces king to e3. Now I could trade queens at that point by going queen to c1 check, and it's a skewer. After the king moves, I could take his queen, but there may be more. So the king is on e3 and our queen is on d1, right? Let's go through the sequence again. Rook takes f1 check, king takes f1. So looking at this, queen h1 check, king e2, queen d1 check, king e3, and wondering if I can checkmate him somehow. Where can the king go after e3? It can go to e4, f4, f3, not f3 yet, but okay. So let's try different checks with the queen or the rook, maybe. Okay. Hmm, let's see. So queen to d3 check in that position will force the king to f4, and in that position I could bring in my rook. So rook to d4 check. So looking at queen to d3 check, king f4, rook to d4 check, and he's again forced to go to g5, in which position I believe I have queen to f5, which is mate. So let's look at that again, because that was a somewhat of a long sequence. Okay. Also, I'll quickly, actually, before looking at that, I will examine the other possibilities. So rook takes rook, king takes rook. What if I go rook d1 first, king e2, and again I'm out of good checks. My queen is not able to join the attack with check, and that means, I'm getting mated. So okay, so rook takes rook check, king takes rook, queen h1, king e2, queen d1 check, king e3. Now I looked at king d3, queen d3, but let's consider other checks for a moment. Queen d2, actually I'm going to look at queen d3 mainly. Queen d3 check, uh, and if there are other possibilities, we will look at it if we get there. Okay, so that's a good way to save yourself some time when solving, or especially when doing this in a game. Okay, so queen d3 check, he's forced to go to f4. Now rook d4 check, and he's forced to go to g5, and there I was thinking queen f5 mate. Looks pretty clean to me, so I'm gonna do it. So it starts with rook takes rook, queen h1, queen d1, and let's actually analyze to make sure I got the mate right. Okay. Okay, so the computer says mate in 6. Let's look at the best sequence. So rook takes rook, take, queen h1, king e2, queen d1. I'm just reading from this computer line here. Okay, queen d3 as per plan, rook d4 as per plan, and queen f5 mate. Okay, I did find the best mate, so I like that. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so now it is black to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. White has just pushed their pawn to b3. Okay, I'm going to start with looking at the material balance. Two rooks and bishop and knight for each side, but actually the balance looks exactly equal. Okay, fine. So what I noticed first thing, of course, is there is this alignment of my rook with his king, so there could be some tactics associated with that. My bishop on d7 doesn't look like it can do too much. It could take on a4, but outside of that, not too much. The knight on d8 also doesn't look like it can do too much to start with. The rook could consider capturing on d3, d3 or e4. What else? My rook is attacking his bishop once, and it is protected once by the rook, so the bishop could be a target. His rook on a3 is hanging. Yeah, definitely nothing obvious that I see. Maybe it should be obvious, but okay. In terms of candidate moves, rook takes pawn check could be something, even though it doesn't look like it. Bishop takes a4 could be something. Rook takes bishop could be something. Rook takes knight could be something. Pawn to f5 could be another possibility, by the way. That could be interesting. Let's start with that, because that looks rather interesting and forcing. The bishop doesn't have too many squares, so the bishop actually, to stay safe after pawn to f5, must go to f3. every other square, d5, c6, and the b7 pawn are covered. So f5, he goes to f3. Now something interesting has happened. My rook is attacking this knight on d3, which, by the way, is not defended by the c2 pawn thanks to this pin. It's only defended by this rook, which now with my pawn on f5 and the bishop on f3, I can distract the rook from its defensive duty by pushing the pawn to f4. Yeah, and if the rook moves, I can take the knight on d3. I think that may be the answer. So f5, bishop f3, f4. What can he do there? Let's start move by move. After f5, what are the things white can try? He can try to sacrifice his bishop, which I will take wherever he does it, on f5 or b7. Or he can try to attack my rook by playing pawn to c3, but I will take that pawn possibly with check. Or actually, if he attacks my rook, I am going to take his bishop. Rook takes e4, because I'll be attacking the bishop on e4 twice at that point. So after f5, looks like the bishops should move because I'm attacking it a second time. And f3 being the only square, I play f4. After f4, the rook on e3 is now attacked. What does he do? Let's say he goes to, if he goes to e4 with his rook, I play rook takes knight, and he cannot capture back, and I should be winning there. I'm going to go with f5. I feel that's the correct move. Okay, so as planned, I want to play f4. The idea being to distract the rook from the knight on d3 so that I can take. So let's play f4. If the knight captures the pawn, by the way, sorry, if the knight captures the pawn, which I didn't consider earlier, to be honest, I will take back. So that's a good bonus. Okay, which he does. Okay, let's keep going. Nice tactic, that one. Okay, white to play. Go ahead. If you would like to pause your video. I see that we are down a piece. White has an extra bishop, but we could capture that with check if we want. Also, I have this lineup of rooks, so I'm attacking his rook and he's attacking mine. And there is an advanced passed pawn on d7. So all these factors should mean something. Okay. So candidates, I can basically all the forcing moves. So rook takes bishop check is a candidate. Rook takes rook could be a candidate. Pushing the pawn could be a candidate, although that seems the least likely. Okay, let's start looking at rook takes bishop check. Now he can either move his king. If he moves his king to h8 or g8, I will take the rook on g6 and I'll be up a whole rook. So that's not good. So he has to block with his rook on g7. So rook takes bishop will force rook to g7. And in that case, what do I do? My rook also on e7 will be hanging. If I take on g7, he takes back. I can try to push the pawn at that point by going either rook d6 or rook e6, try to promote somehow. So if rook d6, he goes rook d8, and I'm not making progress. Actually, I'm not going to go too deep into that line. So we park rook takes e7. Let's look at rook takes g6. So rook takes rook. I do think he has to take my rook. I don't think there will be too many other moves. So he takes my rook. King takes rook. Now I take on e7. Now I am threatening in that position rook e8 with the idea of promoting the pawn next. So with that being the case, if he goes and attacks my rook with his king, let's say king to f6, I have rook e8, and now I'm threatening pawn to d8. Him capturing my rook will not work because I'll take back on e8 and promote at the same time. So rook takes rook. So okay, let's go back. So rook takes rook, king takes rook, rook takes bishop with the idea of promotion. So I think now he has to play rook d8. The idea being now rook e8 will be made by him capturing. And what do I do there? Not sure. I could promote and take on b7. So this this. Oh, sorry, I cannot promote because he attacks my pawn. Rook e8 means that he will take. Not seeing anything winning. Okay. Now coming back to rook takes e7 check. Rook takes e7, rook g7. What can I do? Can I go rook to e8 now maybe with with his rook being on g7 and the other rook on f8. Now rook to e8 comes with tempo. So because his rook on f8 is hanging. So now I'm looking at this move. He has to block. Now I play rook e8. Now I'm actually attacking, hitting his rook on f8, which is hanging unprotected. So he cannot just take my pawn, else I take his rook and I'm up a rook. So let's remove the arrows. So after rook takes e7, rook to g7, rook e8, what does he do? I'm threatening to promote and I'm threatening his rook. Can he try rook g to g8 maybe? He could try that, but at a minimum I promote. He takes my rook and I just move my queen away, and that should be good. Now promoting right away, d8 I don't think works. He just takes back with his bishop and he has managed to save the bishop, so which means I will not win the bishop back. Okay, and that looks pretty clean. Rook to e8, this idea. Not sure what defense he could come up with. Moving the king to save the rook means I'll promote. So I'm gonna go ahead and play that. Now this move rook to e8, I think. Okay, and he gives up the rook. Good thing that we have this h2 square, by the way. Otherwise, he could checkmate us. Okay. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, it is white to play. Go ahead if you would like to pause your video. So I noticed some tactics with bishop takes queen, he takes back, and then knight f6 check. Now this is a fork between his king, queen, and rook, but also because it's a fork between his king and queen, he has to pretty much take my knight with bishop. So he does this, and then I can take the rook on e8, which is now hanging because his queen has been distracted. His queen was defending the rook, by the way, so it's no longer defending it. So now after rook to e8, he has to go king g7, and yeah, I'm pretty confident with that, so I'm gonna just play out that much. I don't think knight f6 right away is good because knight takes f6, so I'm gonna take and throw in knight f6 check and take the rook with check. And now let's think again. Okay, not sure if there's gonna be any mate or something. Of course I could take, my bishop is hanging, so I could just take it and he takes back. Now is there a checkmate? Queen c3 check. He could block with his queen, which is okay. I'm happy with that. I can just trade queens. Or is there something else I can do with this bishop? Trading makes most sense because I am emerging up material, so I should trade down. Bishop h6 check, king h6, queen c1 check, king g7. I'm not seeing any good follow-up there. A move like queen to c3, he can simply just take my queen. So I'm going to take. I hope this is correct. Okay, and we end up at exactly 1600. So I'm going to stop the video here. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Bye guys.